There we go. Got some people coming in. Hi, Ellen. Hi, Rebecca. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, Keely, which is where I'll just get you to kind of tread water, is I'll start the Facebook Live. It's always a little bit clunky, but it should be okay. Hello to everyone coming in. Great to see you. Hi, Linda, Ellen, Elizabeth, Eliza, Chandra. Great to see you. We're just going to start in a couple of minutes here. I'm going to get our Facebook Live started, and then we'll be underway with Keely and myself.
When you say hello to everybody, it reminds me of when I was a little kid and I would watch a show in America called Romper Room. And they would say, hello, David. Hello, Tanya. And I was always waiting for Keely, but it never came.
Oh, lucky, because you were watching or you were on the show? You were in the audience?
I just had a unique name, so they would never think to say my name.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's sweet. Okay, so I'm just
Helps
going
if
to...
you're on the show. When you're on the show, your name gets mentioned.
Oh, you definitely get your name mentioned. Okay. Okay, that's
I see
good.
Ellen remembers that show.
Okay. And I think
Yay,
we're almost ready.
Ellen. Thank you for validating me.
Wonderful. Okay, and we're live. I think we're ready to start. Fantastic. And now, first of all, before we get underway, just let us know in the chat, are you seeing us and are you hearing us? We'd just like to know the technology is working. So you can just say a yes or a no. Yes, yes. Great, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yay.
Fantastic. And as we go along today, if you have any questions for Keely or myself, we just ask that you put it in the Q&A feature. It's a little bit easier for us to manage the questions if we can see them coming in there, and you keep the chat for chatting with each other and whoever else you would like to chat with. I'm just going to allow, yep, everyone can chat with everyone. Wonderful. Okay. Well, let's get started. Today is another one of our free support webinars. And today I'm very excited to be here with my dear friend, Dr. Keely Combs. And we're speaking about how to write a social media policy for your therapy practice. Now, if you don't know Keely, Keely is a licensed psychologist in San Francisco, in Oakland, California, beautiful place of the US. And they started their private practice in 2008, following 6 years as a staff psychologist at Vaden Health Center at Stanford University. And now Keely writes, does research, provides consultation and training on clinical and ethical issues related to social networking and technology. And their private practice social media policy has been adapted internationally across disciplines by tens of thousands of clinicians. Now, I'm one of those clinicians. Keely, I've been using your private practice policy for many years, and I'm so excited about today because you've updated it. And I was even thinking, I need to update mine. So this is the perfect timing. Anyway, welcome. So great to see you, Keely.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here with you.
Now let's begin by, maybe let's start right at the beginning. Why do you think mental health professionals and maybe even some wellness professionals, we've kind of included them in this webinar today, why do you think we should consider having a social media policy?
Yeah, and your phrasing of that question is so interesting to me because over the years I have been both gratified and surprised because I've gotten emails from massage therapists in London or people in very different professions who've said, oh, thank you, I'm using your policy. So I don't think I really anticipated that it would be useful beyond mental health professionals. But it's very much my feeling that we spend a lot of time talking to our psychotherapy patients about things like what will happen if we should see each other on the street? What will happen if we're at the same party or we notice that we're on the same invitation list of a party? And so when I was beginning my private practice in 2008, I started thinking, since I was probably like you, a very avid internet and social media user, well, what about all these other things that are not addressed in our ethics codes? And how do I explain to people what they can expect if they see me on the internet? So I decided that it was really, first of all, useful to me to consider how my current ethics code intersected with my beliefs about my practice. And I wanted to create a document that would help me decide what I was going to do, but also communicate in clear, patient-friendly language what my patients could expect of me. So I will add that sometimes people will say, well, I'm not on social media, I just have an email address. And I think even if you have an email address, based on some of my research, I found that sometimes people find each other. Maybe they get a message from a company and they see their therapist's name and email address in the blast that went out to all the users of the company. So I think that no matter what level you use the internet at, there is great utility in being able to think through and talk to your patients about what they can expect you to do based on potential encounters that might happen on social media or online.
Keely, I'm just thinking, I've had that exact same predicament of being on my way to a party and recognizing my client is on the Facebook event invitation list. And it's like, oh God. But of course, we're talking about in the virtual world. And I was also thinking, some of these social media platforms, like even LinkedIn, with one click, they can completely access your address book and
Right.
just start inviting whoever's in the address book. I mean, that kind of stuff just terrifies me. But often these social media platforms that haven't been built with, they don't care about counselling or mental health ethics or um, procedures.
Right. Right. And so it's like we have to kind of think ahead and anticipate the dilemmas. I like to think that I'm especially skilled at imagining disaster scenarios. And then if you're inclined to do that, then you can think about, okay, if that happened, what would I do? If this happened, you know, and you can think about it from both sides too. Most of us who provide psychotherapy have been in therapy, and we may also have that shape our ideas of what we wish our providers would do.
Now let's talk about the evolution of your social media policy. I actually can't remember how long ago it was, but I know that I've been using the first iteration of your policy, and an adaptation I did for myself many years ago, and it was quite phenomenal, wasn't it? I mean, you didn't expect that tens of thousands of therapists across the world would be using it.
It was a little overwhelming. Yes, it was. I started writing it in 2009, and then in 2010, which was about probably in between 2008 and 2010, is when you and I met on Twitter. But what I did was I posted it on Twitter and I asked for public or private commentary. So there was a little bit of outsourcing that went into developing the policy. I was curious, are there other dilemmas that people think I should be considering? And I very much used the internet to develop it. But I thought about a lot of the scenarios that were coming up in my practice or questions from my friends and colleagues. And it was 10 years ago. And people have been asking for a decade, do you have any updates? And in the interim, I've also done a lot of research, both about psychotherapy clients searching for and finding their therapist information online, and also psychotherapists searching for or accidentally discovering patient information on the internet. And so there were certain things that I realized over time I probably needed to bring into the updated social media policy.
Fantastic. Now, someone's just asking if there'll be a recording. We are currently live streaming this into our Mind Body Training Institute Facebook group, so that's where the replay will be. Now, let's talk about. I was just thinking about the internet changes so fast, and back in the original iteration of your social media policy, you were probably talking about some platforms that don't even exist or have significantly changed. Did you find that as you started to think about revising the policy?
Definitely. I mean, there were some things that found their way into the policy, for example, and I warned Clinton that I was going to be very nerdy and have piles of paper around me. So I'm going to be proving that that was true. Like one example is that I don't know if any of you remember Google Reader, but that used to be a great service where you could collect your RSS feeds of your favorite blogs. And I had circumstances in which I would find that a number of my clients were following my feed, to see what blogs I read. Google Reader is gone, and so I've taken that out of the policy. Originally, Facebook used to have a thing where you could fan a page rather than like or follow it.
Yes.
And I remember having a particular discomfort at that time because I think just the term fan suggested something, a different type of relationship, almost like I was a rock star, or I don't know, there was something objectifying about the term to me. But I had a line through that section for a long time when I deleted my Facebook practice page, but that's not on there any longer.
And also, Keely, I think, like in the early days of Facebook, was because there weren't as many people on there. It was more concerning thinking, look, if you've got 50 fans and 5 of them are clients, that is it possible? I think this was one of your concerns. Could people identify who are your clients from the fan list?
Yes, and I had a public. So what happens when you put something like this online and out in the internet is that people critique you publicly. And I remember one particular public debate was with somebody who was very adamant that, patients should be able to follow or fan me or whatever. And I felt at the time that it was really important for me to be unequivocal that the people who were following me are not my patients, because if there were, when I started my Twitter page, I had 14 followers, but then it became thousands. But I didn't want people to think, oh, I can look at this person's followers and determine that some of these people may be in therapy with Keely. So it was kind of like this. It felt important to be clear that this was my position, because I felt that I worried that those who were saying, oh, my patients can follow me, were basically saying, feel free to look at this list of people, and some of them I have a confidential relationship with. And I felt like I wanted to be a little more conservative and protective, and also explain to my patients and clients, look, if you're following me, I'm going to ask you to unfollow me because I have a duty to protect your confidentiality. And I want to add that it does get into a tricky place because clients do have autonomy. Any client could write a blog post about their therapy session with me. There's all kinds of things that they are fully allowed to do. But I felt like, well, this is my professional page, so I have a duty to make sure that I'm taking care of my professional duties on these pages.
So Keely, what in revising your social media policy, what are you thinking now around friending, following, adding? Do you have has your thinking changed because of the changes in the platform and the monumental growth of something like, say, Facebook?
Yeah, most of the basics have stayed the same. What I will say is that some of the changes in technology and some of my research has encouraged me to make some additions. So if you're okay, I can kind of read through what some of the changes were.
Yeah,
And then if you
please
have
do.
any questions about that, feel free to intervene and ask me about them. So I combined friending, following, and adding as a contact because that's all really the same concern, concerns about both confidentiality and multiple relationships. And I do want to say about that one of the concerns is that I have both in my consultation services and even in my family at times have had patients follow family members. So it's trying to keep clean and protected my family relationships, my personal relationships, that I don't accept follow contact requests on social media. One of the things that changed is that, as many of us do, I had a number of relationships with people who I wasn't close to, who were just part of larger communities. So sometimes I would have people who would initiate contact with me for therapy or for a group, and we'd realize that we were already following one another on social media, or we were connected on LinkedIn, or we were on an email list together. So a new change in the policy is that I discuss that if we already have some connection on social media, I may choose to unfollow you just to preserve the integrity of the therapy relationship. You know, you may unfollow me too, but it's most important to me that I stop following you, because I want to make sure the information I get from you is what you are bringing into the therapy.
Would that also include blocking? I know a number of times, Keely, I've come across current or former clients, let's say even like Facebook's, suggesting friends, or I'm seeing comments on, distant friends or mutual friends. What I've tended to do then straight away is just block the person, so at least we can't see each other's interactions. And of course, they don't get notified that I've blocked the person. But is that something we're kind of including under this umbrella?
So it's not in my policy. I know a fair number of people who not only block people, but include that in their policy. And
Yeah.
they say, I request that we block one another. My concerns with blocking were always that I was afraid that it was a form of disclosure, that if Facebook knew I had blocked, who knows who's on the other side of some of these companies. If I'm blocking a set of people, is that in some way giving information about these people?
Interesting.
Of course, it doesn't say this was my patient versus an ex, or someone who borrowed money and never gave it back to me.
Or
But
someone stalking me.
right, I mean, there's lots of reasons that people might block somebody, but I decided that for my practice, it makes sense with my client population to just have these kinds of issues of trust and talk about it in the relationship. But I think that is a fine approach for some people, as long as they're being explicit with their patients about it. This is what
Yeah.
I do. And then there's one other piece about blocking that I actually think is really important for people to remember, that some people think they're blocking someone because you're using the email address that they contacted you with. But there are many people who use different email addresses for different sites and services. So it's possible that you're blocking the email address that someone wrote you from, but they may use an entirely different email address on Facebook and they can still see your activity.
Yes.
So not foolproof, and it's another reason to make this an explicit conversation and tell people the rationale and what the goal is.
Well, I think the benefit of being explicit, as you're saying, and giving a rationale is it also reduces the risk of any kind of relationship rupture or offence. If suddenly a client did discover, you were unfriended or blocked or something like that, because then there is a therapeutic reason why you've done that, and you've been upfront about that. I think that's what you're saying is the benefit of a social media policy.
Yes, of course. And I'm sure any of us who has ever been blocked by another person knows the unique pain of that. And,
Yeah.
to have that in a therapy relationship can be really problematic.
Yeah.
Do you
And I
want me
want
to
to,
see?
yeah, let's go on. Just before we go on, just a
Sure.
reminder to those people that came late, let us know if you have any questions. Just put that into the Q&A tab. And I should have asked this earlier, but just let us know in the chat with a yes or a no. Do you currently have a social media policy? It might be good just to know how many people on the call today do have a
Yeah.
social media policy.
Yeah, I'm interested too.
Yeah. I probably should have done a poll. It would have been a lot easier
No,
than
no,
kind of
no,
counting.
yes, no.
But straight away, the no's is certainly dominating. So it looks like majority of people on here do not have a social media policy. A few people do. Yeah,
Okay.
great.
So some things that I did add, and this was really based on my research. I've done a ton of research with my former ethics professor, Dr. Dan Taub, both on clients finding our online activity, us finding our clients' online activity, and then we did another study on clients finding and leaving online reviews. And so I added a section on what clients should do if they view or find my own social media activity, because something that came up so strongly in the research was feelings of shame or embarrassment or discomfort when clients discover our activity, whether it was accidental or intentional. And when we wrote up our findings, we really encouraged therapists to normalize that we are living in a world in which we may see each other online. And I definitely want to make sure that if somebody in my practice sees my activity, either whether it's in a media publication or a blog post or a podcast like we're doing, or a webinar, that if it has an impact on their feelings, that they don't have to feel like there's any shame or anything wrong in bringing that into the therapy, that it can be really relationship enhancing for the therapy, for a client to know they are warmly welcomed to bring those things in.
Right. I mean, that's just a great relational approach, isn't it? Because there's so many things that can be beneficial if we're talking about the therapeutic relationship.
Yes. And it's kind of ironic because you and I, when I met Clinton, I used different pronouns. I used she, her, and now I use they, them. And I've even had clients say, oh, I saw an article about you and I noticed that you use they, them pronouns. And I wanted to ask you about that. And it was just really lovely because it was somebody wanting to be respectful. And, he wouldn't have known that had he not seen that. And then it completely opened the door to conversations about this person's questions about their own gender identity. And so it actually, had it been somebody who thought it's taboo to bring that up, we may never have found our way there.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, wonderful story.
Let me just see. Since I do write about clinical material sometimes in blogs or academic journals, I added a section about what I do to protect people there. And that's one of the things that I flagged from the Psychotherapy and Counseling Federation of Australia to see what it says in there for you all. I also talked about, this is a big deal. I wonder if this has happened for you or anyone in the chat, where somebody forwards you an email exchange. Look at what's happened in this relationship. Look at this email I got. So I added something about how you can share with me online interactions in a way that doesn't get them into your legal record. Because if somebody sends me an email exchange or a screenshot of something that happened online, here, that means that's part of the legal record, and not everybody wants another person's name or information as part of their legal record. So that's a new one that I added to the policy.
That does make me curious, Keely. How does someone share that without it being a part of the record?
So what I do is I encourage people, either it's fine if they want to hand me their phone in session. It's also good if they kind of put their phone on airplane mode, because sometimes I'm seeing messages pop up. I want to make sure they're sharing with me what they want, not whoever is texting them throughout our session. Sometimes I'll tell people, just print it out, hand it to me. I'll read it, we'll talk about it, and I'll hand it back to you.
Nice.
And that way it hasn't been sent in a way where I'm legally required to include it, because anything you send to me is legally part of your record.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful.
So
and then it's within the confidentiality of the session.
Exactly. And, I can say, this person shared with me an upsetting exchange that happened online with a friend without having all of that detail as part of their record.
Yeah. Wonderful. We have to be so careful with phones, don't we? I mean, I've heard so many stories from colleagues, particularly sex therapists. I don't know why particularly them, but clients wanting to share photos and just, stroking through the photos, and suddenly there's a photo that you really don't want to see of your client.
I do have a story about that. I actually have it turns out to be a lovely story about that. And I want to say it was someone I was seeing. I believe we started in maybe 2011. And it was someone who was talking a great deal about online dating. And we did talk a lot about how he presented himself in online dating. And we worked on his profile, like what his original profile said to me and what I thought he was looking for and what I thought he wasn't sharing. And he had the habit of handing me his phone and saying, "Oh, this is the person I'm going on a date with next week." And I'm just so grateful that I had the foresight to talk about this, because at one point I said, you're handing me your phone and showing me these women, and we haven't really thought together about what it might mean if I know somebody. Usually in the old days, you would just talk about your date. Maybe the name would be familiar, but when you're showing me the women you're going on dates with, there's the chance that at some point I might recognize one of these people. Let's put our heads together and think about what we should do about that. And what we ended up agreeing upon was, I said, look, if it's a psychotherapy client, if it's somebody I have a confidential relationship with, I can't tell you anything. But if it's somebody who I don't have a confidential relationship with, maybe it makes sense for me to say, oh, I actually know that person. So then you can make the decision about how much more you want to share with me, and not feel like 5 months from then, if we should bump into each other, you find out that I actually knew this person. And, that seemed to be a reasonable agreement. And one day, a year later, he handed me his phone and I said, remember that conversation we had? This is somebody I know. We're not very close, but we have met, we have done things a few times, and I don't want you to feel surprised by that if this relationship develops.
Lovely. I love how that was such a collaborative conversation as well. It wasn't like you said, oh, hang on, this is the rule and you have to follow it.
Yeah.
Mm.
I have found that as I have matured as a clinician and gotten way more comfortable, that instead of coming in strong with these are my rules and policies, that there's a lot of value in sort of sitting with things with clients and being curious, like what do you think we should do about this? Here are my thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah.
And that, inevitably kind of like, my ethical values and knowledge kind of rise to the top. But I think it is really important to collaborate with clients about these dilemmas and think about the meaning and the impact, and make it a curious, collaborative process.
I love that. Now, I think we got here by you were talking about using clinical material in blogs and academic writing. Is that right? And you said this is a part, something you have revised in the updated
Yes.
social media policy.
Yes. I'm happy to read that section, and then I'm happy to refer to what I found in the Psychotherapy and Counseling Federation of Australia.
Okay.
Because I thought that was really interesting.
Yes, please do.
Does that sound like a good thing? Okay. Let's see. So I've added a section called My Writings About Psychotherapy. And here I say I occasionally publish stories in academic writing that references my clinical work. When I do so, I use composite cases. I won't be writing about your therapy. However, if the issues I am writing about seem like they may hit close to home for any of the people in my practice, my approach is to tell you I'm writing something that may be linked to topics or issues we have addressed. I will allow you to read a draft of any material I want to publish and get your consent and let you edit, remove, or change details so that you're comfortable with what gets published. I've only done this twice in over a decade of practice, since I generally do stick to common themes and composite cases.
Great.
And then I found it, I think it's standard 4.5G in the PCF, Psychotherapy and Counseling Federation of Australia. There is something that says practitioners maintain the confidentiality of clients when including confidential client material about clients in any report, publication, teaching activity, or presentation. Practitioners obtain the client's informed consent in writing prior to using the confidential client material for these purposes and take care to disguise the identity of the clients. So that's what those folks following that ethics code would have to do.
And what you said there was that you found that interesting. What was there a particular angle about that that you thought was interesting?
Well, just that, you know, it doesn't all there. I've done a lot of research on this, and some of the research says just do composite cases, you know, make it really de-identify it. And then the other side of the research is like, you should always get informed consent if this touches anything near what you've discussed with a patient, because even when we do make our best efforts at disguising information, sometimes people really feel like, oh, that's me.
Yes.
And so getting informed consent, and also I think giving clients a pen and paper, you know, say, is there anything you want to scratch out here? Do you think this sounds too much like you? I mean, I always, the 2 times I've done it, I've said, this is not you. These are themes that have come up in cases, but I want to really protect you if it feels too close to home. And so I have had some patients say, yeah, let's change the diagnosis of this person in my family, you know, even though it wasn't the diagnosis, let's move this age, let's change this gender. And, you know, that they feel like this feels really far enough away from me now. Thank you for letting me do this, because I have people in my life who know that I see you. I don't want them to think this case was me.
Lovely. Yeah, it's very empowering for the client as well.
Yeah, and it's just respectful. You know, I think I know other people who do a lot of teaching who do this constantly, and I really try to strive to do this very infrequently. I think once you start inching into every other week I'm getting consent from a patient, maybe you're writing a little too much about your clinical work.
Yes, look for the broader themes. Yeah, but you and I have spoken about this before, Keely, that, you know, that the technology has always been just so far ahead of the professional associations. I remember having this conversation many years ago, and I still see there's 2 things I see, particularly with the advent of video and, you know, Facebook Lives, for example. We're live streaming at the moment into a group. I've seen very well-known therapists live streaming not into a private Facebook group, but their Facebook page where anyone can like the page, and then having therapists come on and wanting a little supervisory tidbit and describing the client and the location and the family system, and, you know, it's just, which is horrifying to me. But then I think the other side of that is therapists frequently make this mistake of just, instead of describing the type of therapist they're looking for when they're looking for a referral, they describe in a lot of detail who the client is and the client presentation. And it just terrifies me to think we have no idea which clients are in which Facebook groups or Facebook pages, and people have pseudonyms and sometimes, you know, don't even use their real name. What are your thoughts about those things?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are grounded in my APA for psychologists ethics code, and the mandate is actually quite clear that we always use the minimum detail necessary for the purposes of the referral or consultation. And I have a lot of compassion for people. I'll say for me, like, this is something I'm constantly working on. I have a lot of compassion for people who kind of make this mistake, because I think our training kind of sets us up to do it. You know, in all of our classes about how to do a case presentation, we're jamming all this information in, all this identifying information, and then we have to kind of, no one ever prepares us for, okay, now you have to step back and unlearn that when you're posting in these other places. So I do think it's a little bit of perseverating on the education and training we received, which was in a safe, contained space. But yeah, now when we're posting things on the internet where they may live forever, I've seen the same things, people saying, the age of somebody or a car accident involving these family members. And I think, my goodness, I could just like do a Google search on the news and know exactly who these people are. So
Yes.
we really have to take great care to just, I always think, what's key is describing the therapist you're looking for, someone with expertise in these things, and really not describe the person who's seeking therapy.
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb. Now, one of the changes you mentioned you're going to make and you have made in your social media policy is something around payments. Can you talk a little bit about particular payment systems and what your concerns were there?
Yes. So for a long time, obviously, mostly I was cash and check. The people who get checks are hairstylists and therapists these days. I think we're like the
I
people
can't
who's
tell you how. I can't tell you the last time I saw a check or a checkbook. It was many years ago.
you're so advanced. You're so much like more evolved than I am. But I was using PayPal, and then I use Simple Practice, but there are lots of other payment systems. And there were a lot of issues for PayPal, especially for the people who see me. I work with a number of people who are involved in sex work. I also work with a number of transgender clients, and PayPal is not so friendly to people involved in sex work. If you want to legally change your name, it's very, very challenging to do that on PayPal. And so a lot of my transgender clients are stuck with what they call their dead name, the name that
Yes.
they no longer use. And so that was problematic. And then I mistakenly believed that PayPal fell under the conduit exception of HIPAA, since it was a payment system, kind of like banks. And it wasn't until I read and listened to some of Roy Huggins' work about how PayPal does targeted advertising, so it doesn't actually fall under the conduit exception for HIPAA. And so I, this year, got away from PayPal. And I do use Stripe, which is integrated with Simple Practice, and I use Ivy Pay, and both of them are HIPAA compliant. And
Right.
so, I just realized that there were things that as careful as I think I am, there were some things that I really wasn't up on, and I needed to make some changes. And I think they're also friendlier changes for the people I work with.
Well, I think the other huge change since you and I visited this uh, topic is just the massive rise in cloud storage and record keeping in the cloud. I mean, everything I do every day is in the cloud. It's remarkable. Now, interestingly, Keely, you still do paper notes, I believe. So tell us about why you do that.
I know it's like, I think of everything. It's the most surprising thing about me is that I have this hybrid paper note and like digital practice. And that was also really about sensitivity to the populations I work with. I work with people who are transgender. I work with sex workers. I work with people who are first or second generation immigrants. And I don't know if you're aware of what's going on in the United States, but there's like a whole new administration that's been very challenging to people
I've seen a
who
few
are
things.
not born in this country. And living in California, where we are within 100 miles of a border, the government can decide that they should access records at some point. I also work with a lot of tech nerds, some of whom are very comfortable with digital storage, and some of whom have decided that's not the safest way to store very intimate details about their lives. So when I moved to Simple Practice, decided that I didn't want to pull the rug out from under many people who were happy that I kept paper notes. And I made a commitment to allowing people to opt into cloud storage, opt in at certain levels. Like, sure, you can put my name and the date that we're meeting and even my credit card, but I want my notes in a paper chart. And I remain committed to doing either paper notes for some people who want it or digital storage for those who want it. And I don't know any other, I keep meaning to write an article about it because I don't know any other clinician who is that transparent with their patients about these are your options, here's what you should be thinking about, and whatever you want, I'll do. And if you change your mind later, I'll do it. If you want it all uploaded online, I'll do that. If you want me to print it and delete it, I'll do that, because I don't know what's going to happen in our country. And I want people to be involved and engaged in the process and have a voice and a choice when they work with me about how they want their records stored. And I feel like that should not be a secret. That should be something that that really is part of informed consent, is letting people know what we do and why, and here are your options.
Elizabeth in the chat is saying, yay, I still keep paper files as well. Well done, Elizabeth.
It's easy. It's easier for me to do cloud storage. It feels much more time consuming now that I've gotten used to the comforts of cloud storage, but I get it. And I've never had a therapist ask me my preference or tell me how they do their notes. So it's another way, I think, also that we have a responsibility to let people know what our practices are.
Yes. Now, Keely, tell us about what are your thoughts on use of laptops, tablets, phones? What, as a minimum, should therapists be considering in terms of encryption or protection of those devices?
Certainly, I think that you need to know, how to encrypt your devices. There are some statements by some, I think it's I want to say Proskauer and Rose, but I could be wrong, that if you lose a device that's encrypted, HIPAA reporting doesn't apply because it's considered to be protected. If you lose a tablet or laptop or device that is not encrypted, you have to start doing the breach notification for people.
Breach notification is letting clients know you've lost their notes?
Right. Yes. My laptop on which your records was stored has been stolen, and I need to let you know, which is a thing I think none of us ever wants to have to do. So certainly being aware of how to encrypt your devices, how to password protect your devices, and being able to describe to people, I believe this has a place in both informed consent or your social media policy. This is what I do to protect your data. I do talk about how I have password protection on my phone. I used to store phone numbers in my phone, but now I keep everything in SimplePractice. So even if someone got in my phone, they would have to be able to get into my SimplePractice account to get the names and phone numbers of my patients who are in there. So it's not in my regular phone book.
Right, yes, yeah. So a lot to consider there. And what about policies and legal obligations about record storage and deletion? I believe you updated this in your policy as well.
I did. This was not a thing that I ever talked about, but just, when you have an opportunity to rewrite a document, you think of like, what else? What is not transparent? Very much of my brand is transparency and wanting people to know what they get when they work with me. And so I did include some things in there about how I am legally required in the state of California to keep your records 7 years past the date of our last interaction and meeting. And after that point, your files will be deleted, shredded if they're paper, or deleted if it's digital storage. So, letting people know that so they understand what happens.
Fantastic. Now, I want to leave a bit of time, Keely, for questions. We've had a number of questions coming in. And for people that can't stay till the end, we've also had quite a few people asking about where can they get your updated private practice social media policy. And that's through your website, isn't it? So.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I don't know, I might have to do an update to this and do the Australian codes. I mean, I feel like this is where my real geekiness comes out, is like I want to do like comparative ethics of all the ethics codes. But for now, I apologize. I don't have the 2 codes that you sent to me in there, although I referenced one of them. But if you go to drkateholmes.com/store, you'll find 2 versions of my policy. One is the updated social media policy from 2020. The second is an annotated social media policy. So that would be most relevant to people who are in the States. And that includes, it's about twice as long, and every section has a footnote, and it includes psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors, and marriage and family therapists, and what each ethics code says about, I broke it down for like informed consent. What does it say about multiple relationships? What does it say about writing about the therapy and confidentiality? So that's the second version, the annotated one, which people might really like if they want to see what their ethics code says about this section. And
so if you're in the US, that's going to be really helpful. Is that right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, maybe in 3 months I can do an Australian version and let you know, and
Okay.
and do that one for you. What I would also say is, if you're in the US and you're interested in the annotated social media policy, you can go to Zur Institute and you can actually get the annotated policy bundled with an online course, so you can get continuing education. I think it's $29 for the 1 unit, but you would get both the annotated policy and a course walking you through, and you'd be able to get continuing education credit for it.
Wonderful. I've just put the link in there for those on the live webinar, which will take you to Keely's shop. And just to let you know, I mean, this is like a no-brainer price, $10 for the updated social media policy and $15 for the annotated one, US dollars.
And if you use the code POWER as a coupon code, you can get 15% off any item in the store until October 5th.
Right. Power, as in my surname.
Yes, POWER as in you.
Great, fantastic. I'm just putting that in the chat for people. So the coupon code is POWER for 15% off. Wonderful, thank you so much. Let's move to some of our questions. And I think the great thing about, I mean, I got your updated social media policy straight away, is Keely, you've really done the hard work for us. You can just really adapt it straight away to your own practice and jurisdiction. Okay, let's have a look here. So Fan said, is it safe to allow your client to share their issues in social media, whether by chat or video call, since a lot of hackers are hacking emails and social media? What's the best advice or options to keep confidentiality in the counselling process? I think maybe Fan is referring to like doing online therapy, chat and video calls.
I just may need a little clarification. I don't know if this means like screen sharing or, you know, holding up a screenshot or reading something. Can we get a little more information?
Yeah, just let us know, Fan, if you have more information. So are you doing online sessions at the moment, Keely?
All online sessions.
Okay. And do you have a preferred platform that meets your satisfaction for encryption?
So I'm using Simple Practice, which I love. It's not great. I know they're working on it. I do a lot of couples work, so sometimes I use a HIPAA compliant Zoom because it's a little better at handling people in 2 locations. Like I have a couple of folks where one person is sheltering in place in another state, and I had to get a temporary license in that state. But even if there are 2 people in California and one's at work and one's at home, Zoom tends to be better for managing 2 different locations. Otherwise, I use Simple Practice, and I try and get my couples to stay together because it's hard to get somebody to turn to the person and talk to them when it's on a screen.
Yeah, that's my.
And
I
I
work with a
get
lot of
more.
couples. That is my least favorite thing to do when they're both coming in from different locations.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like turn to them on your screen, and and you miss all the things about like how they relate to each other.
Yeah. And we have in Australia, we have a great platform. I think it's just been released in the last couple of years specifically for telehealth, called CoView, and they offer end-to-end encryption. So it's been great to see an Australian product being created there. Elizabeth says, how would you express the shame of your client of coming across a social media blog post or interview? Can you provide an example?
So there were so many examples of this in the research I did with Dr. Taub on psychotherapy clients finding our information on the internet. And it was all the qualitative answers. There were a number of really lovely examples of people saying, I felt uncomfortable. I told my therapist I saw this thing on her Facebook page, and she normalized it and said it's very common for people to search for these things now, and thank you for letting me know, which was like the one side of the positive response. There were a lot of people who shared things like, I found my therapist's Facebook page, didn't know she had recently gotten divorced, or there were some comments like, I printed up my therapist's photo from his website and put it on my table because it made me feel close to him, but I'd be terrified and horrified if I ever told him that. And when I will present this in live workshops, usually the audience is divided. One half of the room is like, oh, and the other half is like, oh. And it's all of our own projections and ideas about what that means. But what really stuck with me and Dan Taub was, wow, clients are so nervous and afraid. I think one person said, I'm afraid if I tell my therapist that I find her website and her social media presence to be reassuring for me, that she'll fire me, that I won't be able to go to therapy anymore. So there's so much shame and embarrassment that came up in the qualitative responses that it became really clear we really need to prepare other clinicians for the reality that this is happening, and that we need to be soft and understanding and curious in our responses, because clients feel very interested in us and very vulnerable about expressing that.
And I know you did some research into online reviews. I wanted to ask you, what did you discover about how our clients feel when they see online reviews on Yelp or
Okay,
Google?
I'm gonna go for here's the other geeky printout over here. So basically what we did was we had 305 participants, and this was 305 people who had found any information about their therapist online. Of that group, 82, which was 64%, found reviews, and 49 people, which was 36%, left reviews. So it was about a quarter who found reviews and 16% left them. Now, interestingly, most did not believe that the reviews had an impact on their feelings about psychotherapy. So that might be reassuring
Wow.
to those of you who hit me up for consultation on what to do about your negative Yelp reviews. But those who did read the reviews and had felt like it affected their feelings felt more validated about their treatment. And that went in both directions. So there were some people who felt very frustrated by a therapist, and then when they read other reviews, they found out like, oh, okay, it's not just me. Other people have found this person to be difficult. And there were some people who left positive reviews and then saw other positive reviews. Now, the other thing that this was very infrequent, wouldn't be worth turning into a finding, but there were some few cases where people felt a little shaken about their ideas about the therapist. Like if somebody had a very different experience, in very rare cases, some people were not so clear about, made them feel a little insecure about their experience with the person. And there were also, again, it was a very small minority, some people who felt actually jealous. Like, oh, I thought I had a great relationship with my therapist, but now I've read this review and I can't believe that someone else feels so connected to this therapist. So, I think what it pointed to is that we are living in a world in which something that was once very, very private is now being made public because of social media and the comfort people have with posting these things. And we're in a different world than we were a couple decades ago.
Wow, that's just a fascinating research, Keely. Now, we've just got 5 minutes left, and I want to get through just a few last questions here before we finish this really interesting webinar. I've been so thankful you've given up your time today. Now, someone's asking, what if a client has terminated therapy and you haven't had the chance to update them on the social media policy? For example, default blocking or unfriending, and then you're worried that they'll take it personally if you do block them. Is that something you've thought about, Keely?
I haven't thought about it too much because I had my policy intact right at the beginning.
Before any of us had a policy.
But that does not mean that I haven't had people try to friend me or do other things. And so what I have done in those occasions, sometimes people try to add me as a friend or a contact. If it's someone from 8 years ago, I mean, I may do nothing. But if it's somebody who I had a deep, long therapy relationship with, I may just, I do a lot of email. Most of my interactions with clients are by email. So I might just email them and say, hey, saw you tried to add me on social media. It's part of my policy, to think of once a client, always a client. But, I'd be happy to hear how you're doing. And, if I can be of any help to you in the future with referrals or anything else, let me know. Best wishes.
Nice.
So I would do a warm response explaining why I wouldn't be accepting the request, but conveying that I remember you and it's good to see your name pop up. This is the way I manage this. I hope that makes sense. And
right.
I have things in my policies as well, because I do a post-treatment, if people opt into it, a post-treatment satisfaction survey. And I also do a thing where I ask if I can check in a year to see if they've maintained gains. So, I also do tell people, it's not therapy, but you are welcome to give me a report or update on your life if you like in the future.
Fantastic. Now, Elizabeth is asking if you're a therapist and have limited funds at the moment, is there a cost-effective option you'd recommend to ensure encryption for phone and laptop? Do you use software to do that, Keely?
I just use FireVault on a Mac. I forget what it is for PC. I want to say VeraCrypt.
Okay.
And
is that a paid product, FireVault?
It's part of the Mac software.
Oh, okay, great. So you just enable it.
I don't pay for that. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And our last question here from Marsha, what do you think about whether or not to inform clients that you send out a free online newsletter, which may have content and promotions to buy a book that they have?
That's interesting. So I do have 2 newsletters on my website that I've been, if I were taking Clinton's like regular consultation advice, I'd probably be beefing them up a lot more than I am. But I have one that's for therapists, and then I have one that's for clients, because I do intend to do some relationship workshops in the future. I think what we have to do is, and I would encourage you to look at your own ethics code about advertising and media. Most ethics codes have some comment that if you're going to incur a financial benefit for something, you need to let people know that. So you might want to look at your own ethics code to see what it says about advertising and statements and like, let's say like affiliate codes, like if you were to put in your newsletter, oh, buy this product and you're going to get money because people clicked on that link. We are ethically, in most ethics codes, meant to disclose that
Yes.
we will get a benefit to that. So, but I think, you know, if you're writing a book about the issues that are relevant to your patients and you want to talk about that, that's fine. You might want to consult a mental health attorney too, just about making sure that your statements make clear that you have not initiated a therapeutic relationship just because someone bought your book or read your advice. You know, there are attorneys who can help you, and your malpractice provider can help you kind of steer clear of trouble in that area.
Okay, great. Do you have time for one quick last question?
Sure.
So Elizabeth is asking, she said, look, this is a logistical question, but do you have an adjunct social media policy to your usual informed consent, or do you have it included in your main consent? She's just concerned there's a lot of pages to review.
Oh, yes. At this point now, I just have my regular policies packet, which includes all of the policies. But I do want to say, just this might be really helpful to people who are looking for the social media policy. The original social media policy was published under a Creative Commons license that lets anybody adapt it, modify it, and do what you want with it, remix it, you know, add a rhythm section to it if you want. And the new updated policies are for sale only, although if you purchase it, you are still welcome to modify it for your own practice. But so I did want to say, for people who don't want to buy social media policy and still want the original still exists with the original Creative Commons license. But no, I don't have a shorter version because I have a lot to say and I'm on a lot of sites, but that doesn't mean that every person needs all of those sections. You know, cut
Yes.
the sections that are not relevant to you or your practice.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Keely. I highly recommend anyone watching the replay or watching the live event here, check out Keely's updated social media policy for 2020. Go to their website. It's at drkcombs.com/shop. That'll take you straight there, and you can see the annotated private practice social media policy or just their regular updated one. That's the one I got, and I plan, it's on my to-do list, Keely, in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to go through that and adapt it and update my own social media policy. So thank you so much. You've saved me hours of time and all the hard work you've done to create this policy.
It's so good to see your face.
Lovely to see you. It's always a joy and a pleasure. Really, truly appreciate you giving up your time. I know it's getting late in the night there in California.
And, I know. Enjoy your day over there.
Thank you. Stay safe, and I hope we can speak again sometime. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Take care, and thank you, everyone, for coming. Bye.
See you.